and welcome to 9 to 42, the podcast from the team at the Guitar Show UK. Join us for interviews, updates and chat with artists, influencers and those that manufacture the gear that we love. Hello and welcome to 9 to 42, which is the podcast from the guys at the Guitar Show UK. And my very good friend Jason Hunt is grumpy and miserable and full of cold. And that's right, isn't it, Jason?
Well, I'm not grumpy and miserable. I am full of cold. So forgive the coughs and the splutters today.
You did cough on cue there. That was quite impressive.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a professional. I know
you
how
are
to do
indeed.
this.
You are indeed. Before we start, we've got a very special guest. As we occasionally do, we have a bassist on the pod this time, and we don't have enough bassists on, so we're going to try and put that right. But before we start on that, this bassist, who I've known for quite a while, it's his birthday, and he's actually agreed to talk to us on a birthday, which is a sterling effort. So happy birthday, Pete Trewavas from Marillion.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is my birthday. I thought I was the only one. I didn't realise you had other bass players.
I think we've only had one, haven't we?
Oh, have you? Oh,
No,
okay.
well, we've had Rhino, haven't we, from Quo?
We've had Rhino from Quo, yeah.
Top man, Rhino.
He is, yeah.
He was good value, to be fair.
I can
Who
imagine.
else? Have we had another one?
Oh, we've had Frank Bello from Anthrax.
Yes, we have.
Oh.
Yes, we have.
Oh, in fine company then. I'm in
You
fine
may
company.
well be the third. Of the Holy Trinity, you are the third.
Exactly,
What can I say?
Yes, well. But on my birthday as well. So
On your birthday. That counts double.
that bumps me up.
Yeah,
somewhat, I'd say.
That counts double. So thank you very much for being with us on your birthday.
It's my pleasure.
I don't know whether to start at the beginning or the end. I think we probably ought to, probably start with the Marillion thing, if that's all right.
That's probably wise, yeah.
It's probably wise. Should we start there? Okay.
People can get a bit of context then, can't they?
Because you've been in Marillion for a fair few years now, haven't you?
Yeah, feels like a long time. No, it actually doesn't. And funnily enough, it doesn't feel like that long sometimes. And other times, depending on what's going on, I suppose, in the year, it can feel like a long time. But yeah, the years have flown by, really. But 40 odd years. I joined in 1982.
Wow.
41 years.
Yeah. That's well done. Yes, I was thinking I won't commit myself to a bad maths problem. So 41 years. It is 41 years. I actually got it wrong one year. I wrote 40 years, and it's like it's not. By the way, Lucy said it's not. By the way, but never mind.
So before then, am I right in saying you were in a bit of an early's pop band? You were a bit of a Haircut 100 band.
I was in one of those sort of bands. Well, yeah, kind of it post-punk, new romantic-y thing. I started years and years. So to put it all in context, a long, long time ago, my first professional, I suppose, semi-professional gig in music was playing bass in a progressive rock band called Orthodox from Aylesbury.
Right.
And we used to drive around in an old beat-up bus. And I was 15, 16 at the time. And their bass player moved on to do other things. He ended up in Right Said Fred, funnily enough. But that's another story. So I was in this band and I was playing kind of a cross between folk. We did things like Jig a Jig and a bit of Stackridge type music. But we also did quite a lot of proggy stuff and a bit of Golden Earring and all sorts of people like that. And then punk came along, and it's like, oh, what do we do now? Because I at the time, punk seemed to just destroy the music scene where I was. Because living in Aylesbury. I've always lived in Aylesbury, really, although I was born in Middlesbrough. And it was kind of on the outskirts of London. It was very confusing because there was all these, everybody, if you weren't in a punk band, you weren't being current because of the music press. But none of the kids that wanted to see live music wanted to see punk bands. They wanted to see the bands that they, had been listening to before. They wanted, so it was a strange old time. And then I was in, sort of new wave, just sort of moved around doing that kind of thing, and ended up in a band called the Metros. I mean, it was more of a name change than a personnel change. I was sort of playing around with various rock bands with more or less the same people in them, and another couple of songwriters that were signed to Chapels that were doing country music, kind of Eaglesy type country music. And I used to go down to Chapel's studio, and when they'd written songs, Chapels wanted them demoed, so I would be the bass player on the demos. So that's kind of my first recording experience. And on the back of all of that, the Metros ended up going to America, because we figured, if we can't make it in London, why not try America? It's got to be easier, right? which was kind of very backward thinking, really. But so that failed. We got a lot of interest because we were English and we were different, but we couldn't land ourselves a record deal. We had publishers and we had lots and lots of chats with a lot of people in offices on very tall tower blocks in New York City, which was nice. But we couldn't land a record deal. So I came back from that, and that was when I was doing a farewell show for a bar, a well-known bar in the King's Head in Aylesbury was closing down, and they were having a sort of farewell gig, and I was roped in to be the bass player in amongst a lot of other people. And Fish was there, and he said, "I need a bass player." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "But we're going on tour in 2 weeks." I said, "Right." He said, so anyway, I sort of agreed to go down and meet everybody and have a little jam, and then I kind of I joined the band. I sort of agreed. I started off agreeing to be on the tour, but because I'd sort of grown up playing and listening to prog, although I wasn't playing prog at the time, I was kind of right back in where I felt comfortable, and I knew how to do what Marillion required on the bass, because I'd been doing that beforehand in this band Orphe. But no, and also I'd sort of listen. I used to, I picked up a lot of stuff from all sorts of bands that I'm sure we'll chat about during this podcast. So I won't go on. But yes, and then I joined Marillion, and soon after I joined Marillion, we landed a record deal, which was nice.
Which was nice. Nice little fast show moment there. Because you were almost the last missing piece of that signed incarnation of the band, weren't you?
Yes. I was enough of a difference to make it feel like, well, there's something here that we can work with, Yeah, it was strange because they'd done Radio 1 sessions, and I mean, Diz, the old bass player, I'm very good friends with Diz, I thought he was a good bass player. Maybe he wasn't flamboyant enough for what was required. With long passages of music, you sort of need a bit of movement and a bit of, I don't know, melody and maybe flair here and there, just to sort of stand out a bit, because that's kind of what the music sort of required in those days. If you were doing that kind of genre of music, which Marillion were. So
well, you're no stranger to both ends of the neck, are you?
No, that's true. Yeah. Up and down it all day long.
But actually, I'm right in saying within a year of you joining, that's a top 10 album band.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
What was that like?
I can't remember. I mean, I think it was. I think did the first album chart at 6 or something?
It was certainly top 10. I wouldn't be sure on the exact position, but it certainly charted because you were everybody's pick for the band that's going to break, weren't you?
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that Marillion did before I joined that were right. You know, they had a publicist. They used to hire. I was impressed with the professionalism actually, because they had a publicist and they definitely had an idea of where they wanted to go and you know how they could get there. And it was a case of we're going to follow this path as best we can, and this is how we think we can get attention, get people interested, get in the door. It was all about getting in the right doors to the right people, really, and trying to talk to people face to face as opposed to writing letters, because the amount of letters that just come back with the same sort of response, not what we're looking for at the moment. So that gets very soul destroying. We've all had those letters.
I've still got mine.
I mean, I'm sure you two haven't, but I've had plenty of them.
No, I've got them all in a folder at home.
So the one thing there, Pete, then, before we go a bit further, essentially you were never going to have a proper job then, were you?
No, I had a proper job.
Right.
And I thought, this isn't for me. No, there were a few things kind of lined up at the right time, really. One of them was that I was offered to go to America and sort of see how I did with the band I was in. And that was really what I was passionate about. And the other thing was that I was on a 4-year course, which was coming to an end. And I wasn't sufficiently, I wasn't convinced I was going to pass the last year of the course I was on. It was a radio and television course.
All right.
Essentially fixing TVs and radios.
Right.
So, and that was in the days of valve technology. And it was when I started it was valve technology, and then this is getting really boring, but I will I'll carry on as I've started this. Sony brought out the Trinitron TV, which was all about transistors, and they didn't have chips in those days, but they used all the diodes and transistors in a certain way to allow the TV to do a certain amount of fault fixing itself. Right. And so the course gradually had to start changing very quickly to become current. So consequently, the teaching got a little bit strange in places, and wasn't quite. When you'd look at certain things and think, well, this isn't. We haven't been taught all of this yet, because the teachers were kind of trying to learn about it as at the same time as we were. Right. So anyway, consequently, that was quite a happy accident for me, because it was very easy for me to leave my job and go to America. The hard part was coming back broke, phoning my dad up and saying, "Dad, I need a plane ticket to come home." He said, "I told you." No, he didn't. He was really good, but he said, "Well, okay." He said, "But when you get home, we need to have a talk." So we had the talk about, you can't do this forever, because but the great thing was that he was a really, really good semi-professional musician. He was a fantastic jazz pianist. Amazing. I didn't realize how good he was until I became, I realized that other people who claimed to be good at playing piano just weren't in his league. He was amazing, actually. And he was really, really, he was the person who inspired me in music. And he was never allowed to follow his dream. So he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to do this, see how far I can get with this professionally." He said, "Okay, then, well, let's make a deal." I said, "Well, how about if nothing's happened by the time I'm 25, then I'll give up and find a proper job." So that's what I did. So that allowed me to have that gap to explore how I was going to become a professional musician. And gradually, I joined Marillion and we signed a record deal, and gradually, you'd assume that once you sign a record deal, that's it. You've sort of become a professional musician, but it takes longer than that, really, because you don't really see any money. You're busy paying other people back first.
Yeah.
And you do that for years because that's the game that's played, really. We're going to give you this much money. Oh, but because of everything that's happened and your sales figures weren't quite what we expected, you still owe us all of this, because of our marketing budget was this and blah, 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 and deductions and all sorts of things. So anyway, so consequently, it takes a while to actually see any money yourself.
You're the band that changed all of that, aren't you?
We are the band that changed all of that. Yeah. I mean, we had to wait for time to help really with all of that, because we were despondent with EMI, and then we were despondent with the independent record labels, and just at the sort of time where we were thinking, well, what are we going to do in future? Because we don't want to sign another deal, but we need a certain amount of money to be able to make another record. And then the internet just started to break at about the right time. It just started to get more than just a nerdy thing that happened at weekends and in people's bedrooms. So yeah, I know how that sounds. You know what I mean. So yeah, we were able to sort of get onto that, and I think we were the first band in the UK certainly to have our own website.
Wow.
Shortly after, indie things started having websites, and then mainstream companies and banks started to get on board. But that probably took another year or two. It might have been a bit quicker than that, but we were very, very ahead of what was going on there.
So just in between those two things then, we've gone from your signing to then rejecting the whole model. But actually, in between all of that, there's a fair amount of success. But also, and it's difficult for a lot of people. We speak to a lot of people on here whose careers are based around YouTube. They're based around they're based around a lot of the things that Marillion actually did first. But you were part of that old model of you got signed, and whatever the records were selling, you were still signed. You were constantly almost being told that you still owe us money. And at any point in time, you could be dropped.
Yeah, that's basically what happens. And the and every now and again, the goalposts would change as well. So for example, there was when we first signed, videos that you made were non-recoupable. Sorry, they were non-recoupable, which meant the money that cost to make the record, we had to pay back out of our 7% or whatever it was. They kept their 93, and we had to pay back the record. But with the video, we didn't have to pay anything back. And then Duran made Rio, and it cost a lot of so much money that the record company thought, do you know what, we'll start recouping some of this. So it was like, videos are now half recoupable, and then they became completely recoupable. So you'd be in a stupid situation where you'd make a record. I think there was instances where the video cost more to make than the album and the singles that the video was kind of representing.
Yeah.
To be fair though, if I was Duran Duran and I knew it was non-recoupable, I'd have gone to the Caribbean or wherever it was and hired a yacht.
They obviously thought of that before we did.
I just don't get Marillion's music is that kind of Caribbean.
I don't think it would have
vibe.
worked, would it? No. Having said that, we have made some awful videos, so maybe we should have done that.
Maybe not a yacht, maybe a barge.
maybe a barge, yeah, barge round Birmingham or something, or or in the West Country. That would have suited some of our music quite well. But you're right, actually, Ant, because we did. I'm telling a rather sad tale here, but we had a lot of success, and we did. The record company did put a lot of money behind us, but it's interesting when you suddenly, when you've had quite a lot of money spent on your first album and it does well, and then with the second album, you can see the disinterest because they don't think they've got anything to sell. It's like the first album was always going to be interesting to people because it was new. It was a new band. It was a new thing. It was a new direction for them to take. We're signing an old style rock band in the kind of midst of all this new wave and post-punk, and people would be like, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that is. And all the people from the north who didn't like punk anyway were like, well, that's more up my tree. I'll be buying that. I will. And they put lots of posters on train stations, massive posters on train stations of the first album cover. And with the second album, you could just see that there wasn't really, oh, well, what are we going to do with this then? And so the third, Misplaced, strange enough, the third album, we had to do on a real budget, which is why we went to Berlin, because at the time, Berlin was, Germany was a cheap place to go. So that's where we went. It was a kind of budget studio. Chris Kimsey was doing kind of budgety. He was doing stuff because he'd been working. Chris Kimsey was the producer, incidentally, of Misplaced. He'd been working with the Stones for quite a few years exclusively, and he was just trying to get his name back out into the world of the record companies, so that they knew, he was still a producer and was still willing, up for work, essentially. So he did Killing Joke just before he did us, and I'll tell that story in a minute. We went to Hansa Ton Studios in Berlin, and again we wrote what we thought was a good album, and the record company, somebody from the record company, I won't name any names, came over and sort of wasn't that impressed. I think they fell asleep during the playback. If I might be that might be the next album, but and there's the word was, well, we can't do anything with this. There isn't a single. And Chris said, look, there's a song on here, Kaylee. He said, I'll make that a single for you. He said, I know how to make that into a single for you. And I was thinking, well, there's at least, because I was thinking, well, Lavender, you just lift them and make them into, top and tail them, essentially. So anyway, Chris did what he did with Kaylee, and as soon as EMI realised what was going on, because what used to happen with Marillion songs traditionally was that they'd chart high. Garden Party did it, for example, chart high first week and then drop, because all the people that were interested in it had bought it. They'd found out where it was on, where they could buy it, and they bought it, because that's the kind of following we had. We didn't have your mainstream pop following. We had a sort of cult rock following. But with Kaylee, it started to keep climbing. And all of a sudden, you saw the effect that EMI could really have on your career. They threw money at it. They flew us back from, we were on tour because we'd booked a tour thinking, well, the single's not, going to do that much. It might do something. It's something for them to work with. We'll go back out on tour because that's where we're making money. And we were told we had to be on Top of the Pops So they flew us back. We finished the show, got onto this, got car,
and did it on a flip chart.
Oh, that might have, I don't know. That I've got a feeling that was Punch and Judy, actually.
Oh, I could have sworn it was Kaylee.
You might be right. You might be right. I only lived through it. I can't claim to remember any of it.
I was only there. I was only there.
It was a Thursday night and I was sat watching Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
I thought it was the funniest thing. I thought that it was a play on you have to mime on Top of the Pops. You can't do it live. And I thought it was like the most punk rock thing you could do was show how fake it was. But turns out he just lost his voice. So
he had lost his voice, but I think it was also a bit of a tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
Poke, because the irony was, I mean, there were stupid things that TV companies do, really. Well, they'd say, "Oh, we need you on set because we're going to time it." It's like, just run the song. You don't need to time us. We're going to play as long as the song plays. Just time the song. That's all you. And we need all the camera angles. So then, well, they'd have you. You'd be hanging around from 9 a.m. till I don't know what time they filmed. They probably finished filming about 6 or 7 at night, every act, and then they opened the bar and you were allowed to have a drink. Up until then, it was all teetotal and sandwiches from the canteen.
As it happens, I wasn't a Marillion fan at that point in time. I came to Marillion a little bit later.
What?
I know. It's outrageous, Pete. I know. I'm sorry. But the point is, you only needed to live through that year to know how much radio play that song got.
I know.
I mean, it was everywhere. It was absolutely. It's got to be one of the songs or sounds of that particular year.
It is. Yeah.
And then obviously followed up with Lavender as well, which also was so remarkably distinctive and it was only years later when I heard Misplaced, which I heard, it was years later when I heard Misplaced. I would never have thought those two songs could have been part of that album until I then heard the album, if that makes sense, because they sound like singles.
Yeah, I know. It's funny, isn't it? It's just, that's how music is. If you put it in the right context, it can be anything, really. He said in a very deep and meaningful way.
I thought you did that really, really well.
Thank you.
It's all right. And that starts a ride, doesn't it? That starts a roller coaster ride for a few years, doesn't it? Because then there's 3 or 4 singles on the back of, you've got Heart of Lothian still off Misplaced, and then you've got 3 off Clutching at Straws, I guess.
Yeah.
And you're kind of everywhere, aren't you?
We are. And the thing is, we were everywhere in the whole of Europe as well. It was, I mean, what happened in England was happening in Italy, it was happening in Spain, it was happening in Germany. We were huge in Germany. And we did we had to then, that's when you start really working. You had to just lots and lots of interviews, lots and lots of TV. And it's never ending. And with the touring schedule we did, we were practically never home,
No.
for those years. And that's probably what caused part of the demise of that lineup, really.
Yeah. Do you think then, joining the two things together, because we've talked a little bit about, because I mean it's quite well known, Marillion. You were with EMI. You stayed with EMI a little bit when obviously you changed singer when Steve Hogarth joined, and then you end up doing a couple of albums on more independent labels, and then obviously you crowdfunded an album and essentially took control of your own own career at that point.
Yeah.
Do you think all that kind of publicity, all of that following you had, without Misplaced, without Clutching, I guess it would have been far harder to end up where you've ended up today, because you needed that fan base, didn't you? Ultimately?
Absolutely, yeah. That's it's really hard to predict that. I mean, obviously we needed the fan base, but just around. I mean, when Marillion started, bands could get that fan base by playing. It's a bit, in America, you can get a fan base, or the way you have still, I think you have to break America is by just touring everywhere.
Yeah.
And if you do enough touring, that fan base does happen to a degree. So it's obviously having that fan base and that fan, with EMI's sort of help, and the TV and the exposure that all of that brought, that did probably make it easier. Yeah. Although we lost a few fans when Steve joined and Fish left, because they were always it was a bit of a split thing. Yeah. And then people gradually, some people came back, new well, came to us. So, it's
I'm one of those newbies. Season's End was my intro. I mean, I say I knew Kaylee and I knew all the singles, but the first album of yours I ever heard was Season's End, and then I went backwards, because at that point I couldn't go any further forwards because there only was Season's End. So I went backwards, and then was aware of everything going forwards as well. So I guess I fit in that camp of. But then again, I didn't have a view on the split because I'd not lived through it.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's the funniest thing. And also, there's a lot of people like yourself who will go back, have a listen to the old albums, and I'm not really sure about that, But I think that quite often is the case. The place you join a band is where where you think it's best. Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And I think we're all like that. I think even musicians always like to think, oh no, we know better than that. But I don't think, I think generally speaking, where you thought about you joined in with a band because you thought, oh, that's really good. Ben Folds 5, for example, where I started listening to Ben Folds 5 is probably where I think it was at its best. But anything before. Well, I'm not sure there was anything before, but if there had been, I'm not sure I would have. This isn't going well, is it? I should have thought this. I just threw the name Ben Fold 5 out and then realised that I probably. Well, I listened to them on the second album, actually. So I did. Yeah, the first album doesn't have the same appeal as the second album.
The second album.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I did the same thing. I mean, I went back and I listened to Misplace pretty much for about 6 months and didn't listen to anything else. Mainly, I think, because I was an angst-ridden teenager and didn't think anybody in the world understood me. So I kind of had it on repeat for a little while, and then I realised I was just literally a grumpy fucker, and nobody wanted to talk to me for that reason. So
there you go. It's a fine line.
Yeah. But I mean, 41 years. Okay, 41 years. I mean, if you talk, the bit we've kind of touched on, the crowdfunding thing is around the turn of the century.
Yeah.
So that's around about 99, 2000, 2001. Exactly. It starts off with a tour and then it's an album. And it then quickly becomes the way you work. I mean, you're a self-contained
Very
unit.
Quickly, yeah. I mean, we were surprised at the take-up, actually. Well, I mean, yeah, I was a bit surprised. And I was a bit hesitant as well. I was one of the, are you sure we want to do this? Because for me, I didn't want people thinking it's about the ownership thing, and it's about what people think they're getting for their money. It's like, if people are prepared to just let us do what we do and put the money in knowing they'll get something at the end of it, that's fine. But if people are putting the money in thinking, oh, I can, this is the sort of album I want to hear from you guys, and I don't like those, can I have a look at the lyrics before you release it? Because I want to make sure, otherwise I might want my money back. If anything like that was going to happen. So we put in a lot of, we just kind of spelt out what we were prepared to give and what we were and what people should be prepared to expect to a degree, so that and guarantees for both sides really. Yeah. And then what really surprised me since, and always does, and it's a Marillion fan thing, I think it is just how nice people are and how much space people will give you. There's because I can imagine with some bands fans, it would be chaos. I'm sure there's a lot of bands that just want to run away from a concert hall after. They don't, the communication thing with the fans would just be a bit too much. But with us and our fans, it's lovely because it is like a big family.
I can attest to that. It is.
I think that's quite true, though, isn't it? That if you're a band that kind of does stretch what's acceptable within the genre that you kind of operate in, there's that really famous quote from Angus Young where an interviewer says to him, you've made the same album 11 times. And he says, no, 12. And that's absolutely fine.
That's a great answer.
But if you've never pushed the boundaries, I suppose your fans have a right to expect the 13th AC/DC album that sounds exactly the same as the previous 12. But if you're prepared to kind of push, and you always have, I think your fan base kind of accepts it. I mean, there's lots of bands that I really like that have done, for me, that weird album. I don't mind them doing that weird album. They're an artist; they can do what they like.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? And I mean, we've done some, we've really stretched the listeners' patience probably in some with some of the things we've done, but there's always reasons why we do what we do, and in a lot of cases, us going off on a bit of a tangent and making what some people might not think is our strongest work allows us to come back with something else a bit later on and do something that's they might consider the best thing ever. It's funny, sometimes it takes we did Radiation, and then we came back with a couple of albums that were more probably nearer to what people would have expected us to be doing. And then we did Anarachnophobia and came back with I can't remember what was next. Jesus.
Marbles, wasn't it?
Yeah, it probably was. Was it Marbles? Was that next?
I think so.
Oh, you've got them in order, haven't you, Ant?
I actually do have them on order on the shelf, and it was Marbles next.
They're not in order in my mind, that's for sure. Yeah, so sometimes they just need a bit of time to, and sometimes the following album will be what you were hoping for.
I think one of the greatest compliments I could pay about Marillion and about the songwriting process is I don't know if you've written my favourite Marillion song yet.
Oh, right. Yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Because
we're just about to do that.
You might well be. You might well, and I know you're writing at the moment.
It's a song for Ant. But that's what it's going to be called.
But the point is, even this many number of albums in, I don't look back and go, "Oh yeah, that's the best thing you ever did." And I like everything since, but no, that's the one. I can still go to Fear or still go to An Hour Before It's Dark and say, I don't know what my life would be like without those albums. And yet they appear, 35, 37 years into your career.
So it's funny, isn't it? It is funny how that works. I mean, that's why it's so great to be in this band, really, for me, because we often say this. We've got the Holy Grail, really. We do what we want. We've got our own studio to do it in. We're fairly self-sufficient, and we're sort of committed we're committed to do the best work we possibly can, and we always pitch that against the best thing we've done, which is probably the last album. Actually, may well be. You know what? If it's not as good as what we've just released, and we think that is the best thing we could have done at the time, then it gets scrapped. Which is why it takes us so bloody long to write, actually, because we scrap so much stuff.
Well,
and it's the process that none of us really understand how we get our best work. So we're still kind of, I don't know. And I think if we ever worked out how it happens that we get the best results, it would probably stop happening. It's kind of, it's just something, it's this weird thing that happens when we're in the right frame of mind, all in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. Which is harder than you think to get the five in the right place.
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of, it's that thing where if you think too hard, it's never going to happen.
No. You
just got to be not really thinking about it, but allowing it to happen and remembering what it was when it does.
So outside of Marillion then, because the thing is, you've got an entire career outside of Marillion. If you look at the other things that you've done. Because I can point towards Kino, Transatlantic, Edison's Children.
Yeah.
Some stuff with Big Train. I mean, you're never not busy, are you?
No. I mean, take today. I'm doing a podcast on my birthday.
Yes, you are. Yes, bless you for that. But how's all that other stuff come around then? Where does the desire to be that busy?
Once I started, I realised that it was really beneficial for me to do other things as well, because we've all been in the band for quite a while, and we could stagnate. We could get so fed up with each other that we don't want to be together anymore. And I think really the main reason, there are lots of reasons why we're still together, but one of the big reasons why we are still together with the same lineup is because we get on so well and we're good mates and we respect each other as musicians. And that can sometimes go away or wane, or, you can get complacent. And you can just get used to people. And so for all of us to go and do other things as well really helps. When we get back together, it's like, it's exciting. It's you're all pleased to be there. You're all looking forward to what you're going to create together. So it's a good thing to do. And it all came about through Mike Portnoy, actually, because he, long story short, he emailed Steve Hogarth after Dream Theatre had done a little gig in London, which was kind of a tribute to their favourite bands, or the bands that influenced them the most. And so Steve Hogarth and Steve Rothery joined them to play Easter. And there was talk about whether it could be released and blah, 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 and how that would happen. And were they happy with the take and whatever. And at the bottom of one of these emails, it said, by the way, would you ask Pete if he wants to join a project? So Steve read this out and said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, what do you guys think? And they said, well, we think you should do it. So I did.
And were you the first
Then I got
one?
hit by a car.
Yes, you did get hit by a car. I was going to come to that, actually. Were you the first member of the band to then go and do something separate?
No, actually, myself and Ian had been the rhythm section for a couple of Steve Hackett songs a few years earlier. Can't remember which album it was on now. So that was probably the first thing. Let's say it is. I suspect it's the first. Because when was that? Was that 2000? No, 2000. When was the first Transatlantic album?
I'm just trying to find that as well. 2000.
It was 2000.
Yeah,
Right.
Simpty.
Yes, that was it. 2000. Yes. So so it probably was then. Yeah, I would think it was the first. Apart from the, doing a couple of tracks with Steve Hackett.
Yeah, because this is a proper project, isn't it? This is a
proper project.
This is a group with a lineup, producing albums, touring.
Yeah, it was always supposed to be a project, and then it kind of became a band.
And
now,
it did, didn't it? It became with a very definite identity and what have you very, very quickly. I mean, because it's super group territory, really, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, and it was. I mean, it was well thought of, the whole thing. The record company liked it. The sales were good. It was sort of profitable, so it was a very worthwhile, and it was fun. It was fun for me to do, and I mean, everything was done super quick in Transatlantic compared to how we do things in Marillion.
Yeah,
because Neil Morse is a prolific songwriter. He's the keyboard player, singer for people who don't know Transatlantic. He's in Spock's Beard, or he was. There's Royner Stolt from the Flower Kings. Again, he's a prolific songwriter. I mean, he goes in his studio every day and just writes music. And it's it doesn't matter what he writes. Sometimes it's jazz, sometimes it's prog, sometimes it's pop. But he just writes whatever comes into his head, and he'll put it into something. And so a lot of his music went into Transatlantic. With the first album, I didn't write anything beforehand because I didn't really realise what the remit was. Because I phoned Mike up because I'd heard some demos, and I said, Mike, I'm not sure this is for me. And he said, yeah, honestly. I said, I'm not one of these kind of chops, bass players. I'm not a fast bass player. He said, I want you to do what you do. He said, what I like is what you grooving and me playing. He said, that would be great together. So I went along because Neil had sent a demo over, and he'd played all the bass parts. And he said, sorry about my sloppy bass playing. And he played this bass solo. And it was it's like, right, I'm gonna have to learn how to play that. That's not something I can just suddenly pull out of the bag, So I had to kind of step up a bit. I had to kind of change my thinking and change my playing a little bit, and just bring a lot more energy because I realized, Mike's a show player. It effectively became a show band on stage. Everybody was just trying to. It was like being in a prog version of the Who, really. Everyone's playing to the best of their ability, and kind of showing off, and everyone had little bits that were geared to their playing. So that was cool, and it was fun to do.
And then on top of that, there's Edison's Children, which that's still running now, isn't it? And that's a different kind of project again, isn't it?
Yeah, that's that's kind of it's what is it? What is Edison's Children? It's kind of like Floydy. It's funny because Eric is from New York, but he's really, really into English rock. He's really into English heavy bands. He's into Floyd, massively into Animals. I think Animals was the first album by Floyd that he heard. And so there's a lot of that kind of Floydy angst going on. There's a lot of soundscape stuff. And I'm basically the engineer producer, I guess. And Eric and I are the main writers. We've got Rick Armstrong actually joined the band a few years ago and is going to be predominantly on this album.
You might have to explain to people who Rick Armstrong is.
Rick Armstrong is the son of Neil Armstrong.
And it's that Neil Armstrong.
The Neil Armstrong who was who landed on the moon. Yeah, and he's a keyboard. He plays bass, keyboards, guitars. You know, he actually studied piano when he was a child, so he's pretty good on the keys, and he's brought another dimension to the project. We're currently working on an album at the moment, which is one of those things that will just run until it's finished, you know.
Yeah.
But it's really good. It's a good project for me because I've had to learn about being the librarian, like Mike is with Marillion. I've had to learn, you know, how to record everything well enough to make an album, how to keep track of all the versions of songs, back everything up, make copious notes of little bits of guitar solos and this, that, and the other that we want to keep along the way. So it's been a good project for me to learn all of that. And the last thing I think about when I'm doing all of that and writing the songs is the bass. Quite a few times there'll be a song I'll say, well, this song's nearly ready, but I've just realised there's no bass on it. So, and in the past it was either myself or, because funnily enough, Eric started out on bass as well. So one of us two would play bass, but with Rick as well, it's like, well, who wants to play bass? You know, unless I've specifically written something on the bass that I think, oh, it'd be good if I did that, you know.
I've got visions of Spinal Tap where all three of them played bass.
Big Bottom.
On
well,
Big Bottom.
luckily they did it, so we don't have to suffer that again. So.
Well, Pete,
yeah.
Perfect time to draw that to a close. I can't believe we've been talking for 50 minutes. It's gone literally gone in a second. Thank you very much. Very
That's
very
a
much.
pleasure. I don't feel like we've actually said much, but I guess we have.
Well, there's a lot of something.
There is, isn't there? There is. So we end on a Spinal Tap 3 bass guitar moment.
I honestly, I think that should be. It's a shame that Edison's Children don't put out 7-inch singles, which I guess is impossible with average song lengths of about 30 minutes. But
it is.
You know, because he could have had that as the B-side. Really,
we could have.
Mention it to the boys next time you see them.
I will.
Yeah.
I will.
Great to talk to you.
Brilliant.
It's a pleasure.
Jace, I will chat to you next time. Do we have anybody to thank, Jace? Are we all right?
No, we're all right.
We're all right. Nobody to thank. That's a bit of an in-joke there. But thanks, everybody. Take care. We will speak to you soon. Thanks for listening to 9 to 42, the podcast from the team at the Guitar Show UK. If you've enjoyed the show, then please remember to hit the subscribe button and share with other like-minded souls. For more information about 9 to 42, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram at the Guitar Show UK. This has been an A Short Stories production.